Hello and welcome to the next video about the Maelstrom Prophecy project. So in today's video I want to talk about how the Magick system is going to work. So anyone who is familiar with Maelstrom Doomsday will know that the Magick is based on probability. It's based on changing the chances of something happening. And so in Maelstrom Doomsday you can make something happen if it's easier to make something happen, the more likely it was to happen anyway. So something that's impossible, making someone fly, for example, is impossible. So that would have been a grade 5. Now, in prophecy, we're actually expanding this to grade 6. But the way the grade of a spell is now calculated is how difficult it would be to replicate the same effect with non-magical, mundane means, given the setting. So the setting is fantasy, with a little bit of potentially verging on Renaissance technology. Okay, and these are based on 3 separate requirements. So the skill level. So, for example, to undo a lock with Magick, what skill level would that require? Well, if you said to a complete novice, undo that lock with that key, they're going to really struggle. They're not going to be able to do that. Someone who's competent, maybe, but you're probably looking at someone who is a skilled locksmith or lock picker. Okay, so that would be a grade 3 to undo a lock without a key. Now, what equipment do you need? Well, a grade 1 would be no equipment whatsoever. We obviously can't undo a lock without a key with no further equipment. You need some resources, and it's not really basic, but it's not really significant resources. You know, some locksmith tools, some lockpicks. So maybe again a 3. How long would it take without Magick? Well, it's not going to take seconds. It's potentially going to take minutes. So that's a grade 2. So we've got a grade 3, a grade 3, and a grade 2. So across those, the average would be 3. So to open a lock with Magick and no key would be a grade 3 spell. Okay. And so you've then got some examples here. Okay. So to create a fire, for example, would depend on the scale of the fire you want. If you just want to light a candle, that's only a grade 1. Because a novice can do that. You might need some basic resources, but it takes seconds. That's a grade 1. Creating a bonfire-sized fire is a 2. Something like a Molotov cocktail to create a fireball that happens in a short range, that's a grade 3. Because to create a Molotov cocktail, you need a bit of knowledge, you need some resources, and it takes a little while to make it properly. Okay. Now, to make a flamethrower, something that sprays fire, again, you know, you can do this with some bellows and a pilot light and a bottle of flammable fluid, etc. Again, you're talking someone with some knowledge, decent resources, and it takes them a while to make a flamethrower, potentially some days. So you're talking about a grade 4. To ignite a whole area would be grade 5, and to just incinerate someone or something would be a grade 6. So that's impossible. Even with technology, you cannot just go and someone goes whoosh and they're incinerated. Okay, so that's the grades 1 to 6. Equally, if you want to try and become, and I've got invisibility there, but if you want to try and become invisible, if you want to be unnoticed, then in, you know, the dark and or a crowd, it's only a grade 1 because it's relatively simple to be unnoticed in the dark and a crowd. A dusk is a 2, a board guard is 3, an observant guard is 4, avoiding a really careful search is 5. It's possible for a person to do that, but it requires skill, it requires time to prepare, it requires resources. And being completely invisible, so walking through a room of 20 people in bright light with no one seeing you at all is impossible. Healing, so some basic first aid is a 1. Stopping a bleeding wound is a 2. Cure infection is a 3. Stop amputation bleeding is a 4. Stop internal bleeding is a 5. And reattach an amputated limb is a 6. Okay, because although 6 is possible with modern technology, it's not with the game technology. Okay, you can't restore life. That's one of the things. You cannot restore life. If someone's dead, they're dead. And so in the same way as Doomsday has open magic, this has open magic. The player and or the GM will work out the combination of these 3 requirements and would then come up with the particular grade of the spell. Now, on top of that, there are specific known spells, and these are spells that you learn as part of your character generation and indeed experience process. They're named. They have a specific effect, so they are a specific spell. If you like, they're a pre-bargain spell. Okay. And they have several benefits. Now, the thing is, a spellcaster character is not going to know 37 of these or whatever. They might know 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 10, maybe a really experienced mage might know 15 or 18. But they're not going to know vast numbers. And so if, for example, someone knows the Fireball spell, that is a grade 3. Now, firstly, what it means is they don't have to make a knowledge roll. And as you'll see in the casting process in a moment, that is a big benefit. You also get +5 on the will rolls you have to make. Okay. But you can't modify it. So the Fireball spell is grade 3. It does 2d10 damage and it may well ignite the target over an area, or targets over an area. Okay. And there are a limit on how many you can know. But when you've learnt one, you've learnt one. It's in your brain. You can't really learn any more. So we've got a benefit to will rolls, including an additional +1 for every additional spell of the same type. So what does that mean? Well, when it comes to your casting process, if you just want to cast a spell, so you're in the middle of an adventure, you think, oh, I need to cast this spell. The player will propose a grade. The GM, the referee will then say, well, I think it should be that. The player says, oh, well, I think it should be that. You have a little bit of backs and forwards, a bit of bargaining. However, it will be written into the rules that if a player is taking the mickey, then the GM, the director, will increase, the referee, using the AFF term there, the referee will increase the grade. So if a player says, I want to create a spell that sets fire to those 5 cottages instantly, and it's a grade 1. Now, because that isn't even remotely realistic, the GM is going to go, nope, grade 6. They probably would have settled for a grade 5. But they've increased the grade, because if the player had said grade 4, then there would be backs and forwards and it would probably end up on 5-ish. But because the player has said, no, 1, which is obviously ridiculous, it would be a grade 5. Because the mage is trying to basically take a massive shortcut. Okay. It would be like trying to, repair a roof by getting out a spray can of adhesive and going, there we go, I've fixed the whole roof. It doesn't leak anymore. It's not going to happen. Okay. So you propose a grade. There's a bit of bargain, and then you work out the final grade. You then make a knowledge roll. Now, in the original Maelstrom, there is a penalty for the difference between the grade of magic you have and the grade of spell. So if you know only magic 1 and you're trying to cast a grade 3 spell, it's a -20. Okay, so that penalty still applies. So that's where your known spells have a very tangible benefit, because you may only have grade 1 magic, but if you know a grade 3 fireball, you don't have to make the magic roll. Now the will rolls still have to be made. And as in standard Doomsday, you have to make one will roll for every grade of spell. So if you're casting a grade 4 spell, you make 4 will rolls. A grade 6 spell is 6 will rolls with the same penalty as before. So if you're trying to cast a grade 3 spell with grade 1 magic, that's minus 20 on your will for every single roll. But that again is where your known spells come in beneficial, because you get +5 on that will roll, which is a reasonable bonus. But you get an additional +1 for every extra spell you know of that type. So the types are still to be finalized, but say there's a fire type. Now, if you know 5 different fire spells, you get +5 will for knowing the spell, and another +5 for knowing 5 will spells, fire spells. And what this does is it firstly means that the more fire magic you know, the better you're at fire magic. And it allows you to create either a generalist mage, because if you know one fire spell, an ice spell, a light spell, etc., 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 and one of 12 spells, but of different types, you only get +1, +2 bonuses. If all of your 12 spells are all fire spells, then you get a much bigger bonus to fire, but you're not as good with other spells. You don't know that range. So it enables you to go between specialist, semi-specialist, generalist, etc. So if you make all of your will rolls, you cast a spell and you lose 1d6 temporary will per grade. If the spell fails, then you lose 1d10 temporary will per grade and an additional d10 for every fumble. Okay. So potentially you could lose quite a lot of your temporary will. And if it reaches 0, you are unconscious. You can take yourself out. Now, whether you succeed or fail, every 0 you roll as part of that spellcasting attempt on your will is +1 to the local breach chance, Maelstrom breach chance. And as in Doomsday, you might be in an area where the background breach chance is 50%. If you roll 3 zeros, then it goes up to 53% in the whole area. And you then make a breach roll. And so the breaches will be similar to Doomsday. So there'll be a table that you roll on where you add the breach chance, and there's also the chance of it changing. So in Doomsday, the breach chance can go up by 50 or down by 50 or up by 1 or down by 1, whatever, it's anything in between, because you either rip that breach wider or you potentially vent that breach and partially close it. But the player won't know which has happened. So you might have a breach. They don't know the breach chance to begin with. It might be 30% to begin with. They roll the breach and it goes up to 50%. Which means that the next time they fail a spell, it's much more likely, or it could go down to 10%, which means it's much less likely. They don't know the chance. Okay. Now, there is going to be a way of not measuring that chance, but having some feeling of it. And I'll go into that on a later video. But this system then enables you to have flexible magic. You can cast any spell. But you can also know some spells, which means that you have a much better chance of casting those. And it means that if you are a low-grade mage, you can do minor effects. If you're a powerful mage, you can do quite powerful things, but you can't do lots of them. This isn't D&D Magic where you can throw 6 fireballs in a battle. Space you might be able to if you cast the first one and you roll your fireballs grade 3, wasn't it? So if you roll your 3d6 and it comes up 3, then your will has only dropped by 3, which means you're still quite likely to cast another one. But I think the law of probability says that if you try and throw 5 or 6 fireballs in a battle, there's going to be a bit of a disaster. So that's it for today. Obviously, most of the videos so far have been on sort of mechanics and basic principle, but we're going to start to do some on setting soon. Hopefully that was useful, and stay tuned.